Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a pretty fascinating idea, that our first and last words aren't just random moments, but that they actually harmonize, like a single rhyme that stretches across an entire lifetime. We're going to look at how we begin and how we end our lives with language. Our whole story starts with a really shocking discovery. The author of the work we're looking at today was out foraging for blackberries, and he stumbles upon this scene, the remains of a woman named Toyna Hansen, who had died in the thick brush and had gone unnoticed for a full year. This jarring moment is what sets the stage for a much deeper question.
And that question is this: how does a life of language really begin, and how does it truly end? You see, this discovery about a forgotten ending made the author look all the way back to the very beginning. And what he found was this unexpected, beautiful symmetry between the two.
So let's start where we all start, at the beginning. We're going to talk about the myth of first words, because we all have this romantic, picture-perfect idea of a baby's first word. But the reality, it's often a lot more mush than mama.
Yeah, the myth is that a baby looks up and clearly says mama. But linguists, well, they tell a very different story. Take the linguist Catherine Snow's son, Nathaniel. His first word was something like moi. Now, his Dutch-speaking babysitter, she heard it as mooi, which means pretty. His parents, though, they were sure it meant more. It wasn't a clear word. It was a phonological mush that loving listeners shaped into meaning.
And this whole situation leads to what the author calls Trixie's Dilemma, which he named after a character in the kids' book Knuffle Bunny. It's that awful, frustrating gap when you know what you want to say, you have a clear intention, but you just can't make the words work and the person listening just doesn't get it. Trixie is going nuts because she's lost her bunny, but to her dad, it's all just gobbledygook.
You see how fuzzy this all gets, right? What even makes a word a word? I mean, if it's just babble that we interpret, does that count? What if a baby says papa to their dad, but also to the mailman and any other guy who walks by? What about just imitating a sound like vroom for a car? And here's the big one. Does a parent's desperate desire to hear a word actually help create one? It's really not so clear-cut.
Okay, so now let's jump to the other end of life. The author uses this really powerful metaphor here: rainbows versus rain. We all imagine last words as this spectacular, colorful rainbow. But the reality, it's usually a lot more like quiet, everyday rain. The myth, right, the one we see in movies, is that people go out with these perfect, profound last words. Oscar Wilde supposedly quipping about his ugly wallpaper, either it goes or I do. That's the rainbow. But the reality, what doctors and nurses actually see in hospices, is that most people are silent, or they're delirious, or they can only manage simple, functional phrases. That's the rain.
And the data? Wow, the data really backs this up. A famous 1904 study of almost 500 dying patients by Dr. William Osler found that a massive 92% were either silent or just unobserved when they died. And lucid speech, those perfect last words, only 1%. The rainbow, it turns out, is incredibly rare.
This stark reality totally clashes with legal ideas, like the dying declaration. You know, the law often assumes that people at the end have this moment of pure clarity, that they'll breathe truth. But the actual physiology of dying, where the brain is an organ in the process of failing, well, it rarely allows for that kind of clarity.
So, if first words are mush and last words are rain, what's the connection? Where's the harmony? Well, here's the thing. It's not about the speaker. It's about the listener. It's about the attentive person who is there, at the window, choosing to hear.
The anthropologist Gregory Bateson just put it perfectly. It takes two to know one. These moments, at the beginning and the end, they're not solo performances. Nope, they are duets. They are co-created by the speaker and the listener together. And check this out. The process is identical at both ends of life. First, there's an ambiguous signal, right? A babble, or maybe a moan. Then, an attentive witness makes a choice to really listen and to interpret that sound. Then, that witness gives the sound meaning. And in that moment, boom! A profound human connection is made.
The ancient Romans actually had a word for this, which is pretty cool. The word was fari. And fari wasn't just any old talking, it was speech that had authority, something that mattered, almost like it was divinely inspired. So a baby, an infant, which is where we get our word infant, was literally someone without far.
And this is the absolute core of the rhyme we're talking about. At both the start and the end of life, the person speaking is, in a way, an infans. They are without phareia. It is the listener who grants them that authority. It's the listener who decides that a sound is actually something that matters.
So why does all this matter? Why is this harmony across a lifetime so important to think about? Well, because it's not just some linguistic oddity. It tells us something really fundamental about the story of life itself.
As the author clarifies, he's not saying first and last words are the same song. They aren't. Rather, he says they harmonize. It's like a deep, echoing chord that connects our very beginning with our very end. It's a shared melody of dependency and ultimately of connection.
Let's just break that harmony down. Both first and last words are fuzzy, right? A babble becomes a word. A moan becomes a message. Both absolutely depend on a loving witness to give them meaning. Their agency, the power to mean something, is co-created. And what's really interesting is that when they do take a clear form, they're often formulaic, like bye-bye and I love you, phrases that basically bookend our entire social lives.
The psychoanalyst Sabina Spielrein had this beautiful quote that's used in the book: "The ancestor sleeps within the child, and the child within the ancestor." It just perfectly captures this idea that the end is reflected in the beginning, and the beginning is reflected in the end.
And maybe this is the biggest takeaway of all. Our most defining words, our first and our last, are never, ever ours alone. They aren't solitary trophies. They're the bookends of a shared story, a story that requires someone else to be there to listen. They are, at their core, social acts.
And that brings us full circle, right back to the author and to Tina Hansen. He realized that all his research, all his writing, it didn't bring him any peace. The only thing that worked was when he went back to that spot and spoke to her, when he acted as her witness. By making her, as he says, social as a dead person, he finally completed her death, giving her the attention she was denied in her final moments.
Which leaves us all with one final question to chew on. If our most profound words at the very beginning and the very end of our lives depend entirely on an attentive listener to give them any meaning at all, who will be listening at your window?